life can be understood backwards but must be lived forwards. With the millennials, it's about what about progress? Animal testing is so passe. They read the ingredients of what they're using. The whole climate tech revolution actually is a very Gen Z-centric revolution. There's a beautiful saying. We always overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in a decade.
What is that one thing they can really keep in mind when they're entering the new corporate segment? Hi, this is Priyanka Arora, and today I'm super excited because we are going to be having Abhijoy Gandhi, who is going to join us today on this podcast and talk about his latest book, Yapaholics LLM. It's an exciting book, and this podcast, you guys have to stay tuned very till the end because you're gonna learn a lot about how to handle the different kind of challenges that come in the corporate world, and this is a perfect guide for it. Hello and good evening to all whoever is watching this and gonna watch it later. I'm Priyanka, aka Madira Vogue. A lot of you might be knowing me. Today I'm gonna be talking to an author, a person who is also running an interesting AI startup and has been wearing multiple hats. So I am super excited, super excited. And yes, this is not Madira Vogue. This is gonna be something new which we are gonna be bringing to the LinkedIn platform of mine, and it's gonna be called Hustlers and Literatis. Thank you so much for coming and doing this and being in Bombay for this whole interview today.
Thanks for having me.
Abhijoy, before, I've been reading the book, I have enjoyed it. Last 3 days has been a journey for me as well. But you wear multiple hats as I got to know. You know, you've been a CEO of Glue Inc. You have been an author. You have had a decades of experience in the corporate world, as you know, in the finance as well as being part of different multinationals. So is there a common thread which brings all of this together? I'm kind of trying to understand how this whole thing began for you.
Yeah, we might have to go back, I guess, to the start. Listen, I'm from a very small town.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from a family of doctors.
Oh.
And every dinner table conversation was about trying to maximize this gift called life. And I've got all of these guys who are now very big in India. So Imti, I think, is now a director, Imtiaz Ali. And Madhavan, Ranganathan used to be my swimming buddy. And I grew up with all of them. And I was a naughty guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was school captain, so they're awesome now. But at that time, it was a very different equation. Mm. And then when it came to going out into the world, because of the family heritage of cerebral endeavors, I just kind of put on the blinders and I just kept going. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was in consumer goods or multinationals or consulting, or I spent about a decade on Wall Street and banking, mm-hmm. there was always this question of what next? Mm-hmm. Because surely, paycheck's great. Don't get me wrong, but it fades, right? 2 paychecks later, you know what a paycheck is, and there's then the question of why am I here? Mm-hmm. What am I meant to do? How do I unleash my full potential? How do I pay back the privileges? And then I bore the cross of being an Indian. I took that very seriously. Mm-hmm. So when I went to the US, the only thing we guys were known for is Y2K, right? It's like, will Y2K end the world? Mm. And if it won't, then it must be the Indians who will solve it. Okay. So from there, it's been a long journey. And why all of these? It's always been trying to unpeel the onion and try and understand, where we can contribute. So it's been a cross I've borne all my life.
Wow. And from a family of doctors and, now having your own wellness startup, this must be very interesting. And that too in the AI space. I mean, I am very intrigued to know, how did that journey begin? Was there an influence in the family as well?
Well, I was obviously the black sheep. So this is all fact checked. So mm-hmm. you can do that too. There's about 38 adults in the US, and all of them are doctors, barring me. And they're all super specialists. So they're not your MD, which I think in India is called an MBBS. They're all like, and then there's me. And I always had a macro inclination. But I think there were 2 trigger points, right? The first was the great financial recession. I used to work for Lehman Brothers.
Oh.
And then that was the largest bankruptcy in the history of humanity.
Yes.
Right? And so as part of the core team, I also worked with the Fed and with a firm called A&M, and we helped size assets, unwind, Barclays came, they did their own shenanigans. And this was a pivotal time in my life because the whole world didn't know where we were going. And the funny part is, about 6 months before this, I had this eureka moment that human beings sleep for about 1/3 of their life.
Nice, yeah.
And while all my colleagues and friends were buying fancy cars, I was like, but Don, why do mattresses cost only like $200? If we sleep for 1/3 of our lives, 1/3 of everything we should have, we should invest in the mattress. And people thought I was a little cuckoo. But I bought a $10,000 mattress as a young guy on Wall Street, and everybody couldn't believe that. And I've never bought cars, and I've had no such preoccupations. And I figured that one has to assign value for whatever is most critical to one's life. So kind of back then that notion came, and I was hazed endlessly. But I figured that ultimately one must invest in what matters most.
That's true.
So fast forward 20 years, and COVID hit. The piece that stuck out for me is, yes, COVID was dire, and yes, it was probably the most impactful human-level event since the Great Spanish Flu.
Yeah.
But the people who were impacted the most were those who had underlying conditions. And that, I don't know how many stories there are out there, but that was the story that resonated with me.
Sure.
That it came and it adversely impacted those who had underlying conditions. And then I got interested. I geek out on everything. And so I went down the path of population health, and why is it that we have so much of, and by we, here I'm talking about the US. Sure. 73% of adults in the US are either overweight or outright obese. 65, and that figure is going to go to 80% by 2030. So 4 out of 5 adults.
Really?
68% have hypertension.
Okay.
Bad LDL and heart disease is the #1 killer above cancer, above everything else. And so I started to wonder why we call ourselves such a developed society, but why our population health is so challenged.
There are a lot of underlying factors to it. One being you being in the whole heart of the issue itself, which is the underlying health condition, which got super impacted when the COVID hit, and everybody could see how important it was. Even here in India, everyone was like, we need good immunity. Everybody was popping pills, and it was like a wake-up alarm for everyone. So I get it that, this is a very, very crucial place where US also stands today, that you have to have great wellness. And
the other thing is, it's a $4 trillion healthcare industry, which is larger than the economy of India, 20% of GDP. It's like trying to make a health drink from Coca-Cola. It's super hard, right? Because their core,
the core itself is not
Coke.
there. Yeah.
Just the same way, to think that the healthcare industry, which is designed for higher-end interventions, could go downstream and cater to population wellness. Yes, it's an interesting premise, but I don't think it'll be realized. So I figured that I knew corporate America, and we could take, and we were already very committed to employee wellness and employee happiness.
Okay.
And we could take that upstream. We could take that a notch or two, build out a bigger canvas, and start to promote and drive health, and take the friction out of health, wellness. Okay. So I've never, ever met a human being who doesn't want to be well. I've just not met such a person.
That's true.
So it's a question of priorities, right? If there's a report to be sent out that night, and there's a nice tossed salad to be had at dinner, one's going to make one choice versus the other. And so I figured that it was an interesting, albeit boring, albeit for most people, for me it's really interesting, albeit challenging problem that I would dedicate a large part of my life to. So
that's my next question, that what was the drive behind, coming up with Glue in Sync, and which is like, driving peer-to-peer, happiness between co-workers, and something which is very interesting again, and that too with an AI intervention today, which is everybody's talking about it. Like, how can AI make my life better? But in the health space, to be able to do that and start one of the largest AI companies today, and in the wellness space back in US, how was that like? And I think it's like a mission that you're on. It comes across that you're very passionate about this mission. So how did that happen? How did Glue in Sync come into?
Okay, so Glue was an employee engagement company.
Yeah.
There are two others that are pretty large.
Sure.
And there was a scale challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been through a bunch of pivots. So there was a really good event management, experience management company that became one of the largest on the West Coast. Then COVID came, and what was a success story became outlawed because you couldn't do that in person.
Sure.
And then the team went and they built out a SaaS platform that was committed to employee engagement. I mean, you know the joke, everybody knows it. During COVID, everybody showed up in their jackets, but they were wearing like kachas in the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And so employers were really worried about how to keep employees engaged. And then we built that, and it was tremendously successful. And then COVID went away, thankfully. And then HR and teams no longer needed that kind of a service. And so we call it a product market fit that moved away from us again. And then we said, okay, but we've got a really good platform. We've got, more than 1 million employees who've transacted on it. We've got great NPS scores. What else can we do with that? And then we said, okay, we're going to take the wellness challenge as the only company that's going to go upstream to wellness from employees versus downstream from health, which is what the rest of the industry is doing.
Wow.
So we got lucky.
We got lucky, and you had a good traction. I mean, that's a lot of people using the platform already.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a lot of interesting data also.
35 of the Fortune 100 clients, companies as clients. So of the 100 largest companies in the US, about 35 have done business or doing business with us. So it was a very good starting point for us.
An interesting amount of interactions between peers. And I've seen your website. It talks about a lot of interesting ways in which peers can interact on a personal level. And something which I think in India is missing, because you are on those team calls, and there is a less of interactivity. It's just you're seeing those screens, and most of the time we don't have even the mandate to keep our cameras on. So I think we also need some platform like this to keep people engaged.
We're actually doing a fun bit of stuff in the pipeline for India. So Microsoft, which is one of our clients, I'm assuming they would be very happy because we've been serving them for a long time. They came to us about a couple of months ago and they said, hey, our India team needs to be more involved. And we're like, yeah, you bet. Hello. And they're like, but they love Bollywood. Can you all do a Bollywood special? Can you design Bollywood stuff? And we're like, of course we can do that. And they're like, but they love cricket, and Americans don't know what cricket is. Could you do like a cricket trivia? And we're like, of course we could do it. So our R&D is actually creating India-centric content for Microsoft.
Wow.
And obviously then Adobe and Amazon and Google, Alphabet. So we're really looking forward to customizing.
I think a lot of interesting stuff
for different
I'm looking
geographies.
forward to it. And because we are all on teams, if Microsoft does it, we'll have a great time. Looking forward to that update for sure. So Abhijoy, you have been a mountaineer yourself, and you have been peaking, I would say, the corporate mountains to the mountains in the personal life. But what was that moment when, or what is that one thing you would take back from, scaling these different climbs, at different places? What is that one thing you take back in your personal life as a mountaineer?
So actually, there's a backstory to that too. So yeah, I actually, my dad was a very generous man. He's a very generous man. He took all of what he earned as a doctor and he put me to this place called St. Paul's in Darjeeling. Like, amazing school. And every morning we would wake up and there was the Kanchenjunga, like right there. And so I developed a love of the mountains, and I developed a love of climbing. And then as an adult, my respite from, crushing 80 and 100-hour weeks was to take a weekend away and go climb. And I started to do technical climbs. And there was this one time, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was climbing Cotopaxi. Now, Cotopaxi is the closest point from the Earth to the sun. It's in Ecuador, and it is about a 20,000 foot mountain. So it's the same height as Kilimanjaro, which I've also climbed or summited. And so there's a lot of prep. There's all of these crampons, there's all this equipment you take from the US. And I had a personal climbing buddy because, it's a technical climb and it's like 45 degrees and it just keeps going. By the way, it was also the largest dormant volcano, and then 2 or 3 years ago it exploded. Now it's not climbable anymore. Long story short, they had a storm the day before and, good money chasing bad money. This is the perfect example. So we landed and all of the other climbing teams aborted. And the way it goes is you start at about 10 in the night, you climb for about, 10 hours. And by the time the sun peaks out, you're at the summit and then you have to come down. Because it's icy, and with the sun coming, ice starts to melt at the bottom, and then there are crevices. And if you fall like 100 feet. And then it's
scary.
like, tata, bye-bye. That cell phones don't work there.
Yeah.
So there was a huge storm and all of the other climbers aborted. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a little bit of a stubborn guy. So resilience is kind of, I think of all the things that I really value or that I think needs to be honed, it's resilience. So I seduced my climber into saying, let's give it a shot. We'll be the only two on this huge mountain. And he was like a local Ecuadorian, and he had trained in Austria. And he was like, climber par excellence. He summited Everest and done all of that. So like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, let's just do it. And so we started, not at 10 o'clock, at about 11 or 12, because it took me some time in the night. And we were the only two on the mountain, and we had our equipment, and we had our ice axes, and we were doing all of that. But it was really slow because there was a blizzard, and there was a huge storm. We were not able to. We were about 300 feet from the peak. We could see the peak, but it was like 10:30, and he's like, AJ,
no, it's risky.
AJ, we need to turn around. I'm like, there's 300 feet, you can see it. Like, that 300 feet is going to take you an hour and a half. And it was a tough call, but I accepted that we were just short, and then we turned around. And then I asked myself, right, if I'm able to take such a huge risk on something that's really a passion, what kind of a huge risk am I able to take to actually contribute to a much larger canvas?
Sure.
And that stayed with me, that I've got a good 20 years left. And I need to take one large swing at something which is a hairy problem that most people don't want to even touch. So I know you asked about the combination of mountain climbing or peaking in the mountains and peaking in corporate and what's the connection. I took that moment of heartbreak and I said, I'm going to take that and invest it into something more worthy, something that will actually impact and will have a leave behind that is different from me. So that's how the journey started.
Wow, I am now super intrigued because now that the climb that made you realize that's the passion area, it's actually translated into your next endeavor, which is Yapaholics LLM, which we are here to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
Interesting, very interesting. So coming to what brings you to India, one is the launch of this book as well, which is a very interesting, I would say, Almanac, which has been written for Zoomers and Millennials to, literally have something in their hands to deal with the corporate jungle, as you've called it in the book as well. And you've written about, you started writing this subconsciously, I would say, in 1992 in your personal journal, and it is now translated into this book. So, my first question is, how did the whole insight is there? Now I see the threads coming together and you're very passionate about it, but why as a book? And second is, why the name Yapaholics LLM? I would love to know.
You asked a lot of questions, but I'll try and keep up. So we have many vectors for wellness. Wellness is such a suitcase term that anything can be defined. And one of them is occupational wellness. And as an Indian, I know that our society and our community experiences it the most. So I grew up at a time when if you weren't a doctor or an engineer or maybe an accountant or a lawyer, then you were kind of not focused, right? The beautiful musicians and artists and painters that we have today, and I'm so pumped by that. That was not the era I grew up in. And so folks who had IQ or who had good support structures, they would cram and then they would get to these peaks, right? So whether it was an engineer or a doctor. But that's at an age of 22 or 23. Then there's another 40 years to sustain that. And it's just impossible to sustain what one doesn't love. And so a lot of burnout, a lot of, dismay, a lot of mental health, this whole notion of mental health, which I actually feel is a real crisis of our times, was not that talked about then. It is a very new phenomena for most of us. There's a quote that's very dear to my heart. It was by a guy called Friedrich Nietzsche, who was like one of the philosophers from the last 100 years. He was a German guy. He said, life can be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards, right? So I love that quote.
That's pretty deep. That's
Yeah,
pretty deep.
yeah. And so 30 years later, I know all the things I should have done. Should have, could have, would have done. But now I'm 30 years older. But there's a 25-year-old who's just starting up. And, you know, we think we have enough time, but we don't, because our aspirations always supersede the amount of time we have.
That's true.
So I figured, what if I went back to my 25-year-old self and I wrote to that person from today's perspective? Would other 25 and 30-year-olds also benefit from that? And would that be a contribution to occupational wellness, at least as a huge starting point?
That's true.
So that's how the book came to be. It was written to my 25-year-old self with the explicit estimation or expectation that it might have crossover potential for other 25-year-olds trying to make an impact early in their careers. And so that's kind of why the book came about. The name Yapaholics, it's obviously facetious, right? It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be slightly prickly, slightly insulting, but mostly fun. And the point is, nobody's the bad guy in corporate America. I mean, I'm not talking about outliers. Because most of us, we're trying to contribute. We're trying to be in a team. We're trying to coach juniors, and we're trying to impact the company positively.
Yes.
But it's the process, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when we don't know better, we give gyan. So there's a young guy, and then I'm like frustrated. I don't know what to do. I'm like, bam, bear down on them, right? Tell them about 20 years and how they suck. Right? So that's the Yapaholic is talking a lot and addicted to it.
Yeah.
And then there's the other part of it, which is obviously, so there's the talking incessantly, and then there's the addiction to power. There's the addiction to steering stuff, even if one...
It's like an addict, trying to do a lot of
I just kind of brought those two together. I mean, there's lots of language I created, like even the 9 personas in the book. I just created them.
It's huge. Huge. And they're very compassionate, I would say. A lot of people are like, oh, I've gone through this grind, and let the other person also go through it. Nobody actually comes back and says, I'm going to teach someone, or at least share my experiences which can help others.
You bring up a really important point. I call it, we have generational trauma.
Yeah.
So I had to bring chai. Like I was like a proper trained person. I had a master's degree, and then during my first week, I had to bring chai. And then, of course, I was the photocopy guru.
Okay.
Right? After whatever high-end strategy and analyzing the P&L of firms and understanding how to improve the vita of a company and look at the 3 books, then my specialty became photocopying. Right? And I think that's generational trauma. Right? Because if I have been through that, my default, if I'm not awake or if I'm not really compassionate, is that's the journey. But you guys are different. The world is different. Your parents are very supportive. And I think there is an opportunity for you all to rewrite the script and create a new normal.
And I'm glad you feel that.
Inputs.
We need a lot of inputs.
So we figured we might as well codify it.
Yeah. Everything has been giving me goosebumps, and I'm really excited to keep going back to the book and, understanding it more in detail. But the name also has Almanac in it. So can you make me understand what does Almanac mean?
Yeah. So an almanac is a reference guide which is not traditionally meant to be read like a novel or a self-help book which has a start, a middle, and an end. It is a series of references. So there are 50 different anecdotes. And it is also written as a palindrome, which means you can read it from the back to the front, or you can read it from the front to the back, or you can read it in the middle, or if you have 5 minutes, you can read one of the 50 anecdotes and hopefully get something out of it.
Sure.
The reason we wrote it that way is because it was supposed to be a reference guide. It was not supposed to be a one and done. It was supposed to be a buddy. Right? Like in AI, this is my AI plug. In AI for wellness, we're creating a health coach called Tron, hence my name AJ Tron.
Okay.
Right? Because AJ Tron actually is an ode to Tron that will be, everybody will have a health coach on the planet, we think, by the time we're done. Right now, it's 165 million corporate employees. Just the same way, this is supposed to be a buddy. So somebody's had a bad day. somebody's had an unfair situation, somebody had a meeting that didn't go the right way. They just come flip. They look at the 27 different personalities. They flip to that. They have 5 minutes. My inspiration was Aesop and the Panchatantra, right? There are so many Panchatantra tales. I mean, you're walking down life and something resonates, right?
That's true.
Or Aesop's fable is the exact same for the Western world. So it was written from that perspective, and hence an almanac.
Okay.
It's not supposed to be read from the beginning to the end. It's supposed to be a reference guide.
Reference guide. Oh, that's interesting. And, like a reference guide to understanding people dynamics in the corporate world, which is the most difficult. I mean, I have personal 15 years of work experience now in the corporate, and people are the most challenging ones to deal with. So when did this thought of, making something for the millennials incept into? Is there a backstory to that as well?
I think there is. By the time you've worked as long as I have, there are several backstories. So 2 parts, right? Technically, this book started getting written on the 9th of March, 2012. So it's been 12 years that it's been getting written. So what happened on that day? There was a face-off in our office. I was working for a Fortune 50 bank, the largest bank in the country and by extension in the world at that point. And as part of my portfolio, I had all of these young recruits come and get trained in my organization, in the team that I would lead for 3 months, and then be acculturated and go to different parts of the bank. And that was the start of the millennial generation, that they're coming into the workforce. And I was like, wow, these guys are so different. And it's all in the book, right? I have no shame saying that I needed to know what company I was working for, because I drew my self-concept from that. And then I was really interested when I was young about what my designation was. And obviously, it was super important to me what my paycheck was, how much money I made. These guys know. They're like, what are we going to learn? The fact that you guys are doing this, how is it impacting the Latino community? Or how's it driving financial literacy? I was like, wow, that's different. I never knew to ask those questions when I was in my early 20s. So I went to my CEO and I said, listen, there's a situation here. A 280,000 person bank. Wow. And we're like, these guys, they're going to be the majority in the next 10 years. I don't think we know enough about them. And they're like, nah, it's a generational thing. Everybody's very idealistic at 25. I'm like, yeah, I kind of get that. But now I've been with these guys for 2 years and they're not changing. Now they have girlfriends and boyfriends and they're starting to think of houses and they have credit card debt. But they're still asking those questions. They're not now moving to how much money can I make and when can I get my next promotion. They still want to learn stuff and they want to impact. And they're like, no, I don't think it's that, AJ. I think it's just that their idealism. We're in a stable society. We're in a booming market. Their idealism is extending more. So I'm like, no, it's not. So then we brought in BCG, right, to validate.
Wow,
so,
that's like a lot of pressure.
I had an annual budget and I kind of blew exactly a third of it in like 2 months. And they came back and said, AJ, don't worry. They'll mean revert. Typical, suit lingo. They'll mean revert. I wasn't convinced. And so my way of unresolved emotion was to write about it, right? And so at the back of this book is this picture. That's from my iPhone. There's like 30 or 40 journals. These are real journals. I just kind of went to my office and I brought them all out and I took a picture. Wow. So I started to write about it, and fast forward 12 and a half years and we have this book.
Wow, that's interesting.
And then so it's all fact-based.
Yeah, and the BCG, the research.
No, they took our research and then a year later I saw a report which says, oh, the millennials are very different. I'm like, no kidding.
Stating the
this is all documented. I know we're on camera, but this is all documented. I can pull out those reports and the takeaways. Yeah. So I just want to kind of set the record straight there.
Very interesting. Yeah. And the Zoomers are no different either. They are a way notch above us. I mean, if I'm a millennial, so may be, and they are way above us. They want way more flexible work culture, to different kind of aspiration. They need more than anything else in life is to know transparently where their careers are heading from the get-go of their first day at the new job. I've seen that personally happening here in India too. So how do you balance?
Can I just add, there's one
Sure.
notch higher for the millennials.
Okay.
For you guys, you were all about contribution and you were all about learning. Yeah. With the millennials, it's about, what about Mother Earth? That's the big notch up. They really care.
Yeah.
Now, veganism is at an all-time high in the US, in the history of the US. Animal testing is so passe. They read the ingredients of what they're using.
Wow.
And carbon offsets, decals, a neutral carbon footprint. The whole climate tech revolution actually is a very Gen Z-centric revolution. So that's the big build to the millennials as far as the Gen Zs are concerned. And good on them. Good on them.
Yeah.
I mean, I just came from Delhi. I mean, we need more Gen Zs to do that. Enough said, right?
That answers a lot of why they are so worried, because we are heading into a major thing if we don't take note of it. Right?
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that you brought this up, So, like in this book, you have like 9 distinct characters being very interestingly spread out, from the innovators, the ones who really drive the corporates ahead, to the ones who are like not so great, the sabotagers who can really deceive and have like different personalities. But when it comes to someone who doesn't want to dwell too deep into it or doesn't know right now, is just starting their career, what is that one thing they can really keep in mind when they're entering the new corporate segment? And, how do they balance their energies, if I call it that way?
It's a very thoughtful question, and I should hope that there are a few options, but let me see the ones which I think might resonate, right? There's a beautiful saying: we always overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. It's just how it has been for a long while. And so it may be preachy at this point, but we have to remind our young folks that life extends beyond the next year. And so if they can just wake up and reset and say, this too shall pass, or that there's this project and then it will play out for the next 3 months and then there'll be a new one and I'll get to work with new teams, that can be a source of sustenance. The ability to really reflect and say, this is not endgame. Having said that, I also recommend, and for which I'm sure my HR teams and other corporates may not be that pleased, that there is a time to peace out. The world has more options now than ever before. You guys, remember we talked earlier about generational trauma and you guys being the liberators of that generational trauma. It's okay to peace out. If there's a toxic environment, it's okay to peace out, which is Gen Z lingo for quitting, right? Having said that, and I advocate resilience a lot. Going and working in the gym and tearing up your muscles is resilience, but sitting in a red traffic light with pollution feels like resilience, but it's not. So there's resilience that's contributory, and there's resilience for the sake of resilience. So I'm not advocating resilience for the sake of resilience. I'm just trying to lengthen the horizon just that little bit more. To Nelson Mandela, he says this a lot, right? That when you get to the beginning, to the end of one peak, and you're like, "Whoa!" That's when you see the next one. So remember that 40 years has to be lived episode by episode, and if there's one bad episode, it can be a learning source, and then you can move on to the next.
And now you have Yapaholic as well.
I would hope.
Which can give you those anecdotes and everything which you need to, keep coming up back, with your armors in the corporate world, as I must say. This book is very helpful in that sense.
Thank you.
So moving on now, I mean, everybody talks about, there are a lot of anecdotes in this book as well about the big US dream story, and how, things have panned out for you since 3 decades of writing this, your personal journals. But if somebody sits here in India and reads the book today, how relatable do you think it is today for an Indian audience,
So I had started with the assumption that it's not. It was written based on US experiences for US youth. And then we were invited to this Forbes event as one of 200 fastest growing companies, startups in India. We have an engineering office in Pune through which we qualified. And then a couple of folks read it and they're like, I know somebody like that. I've had that experience. We also have a lot of our editing team in India, and they would do some research with Gen Zs and millennials, and everybody I totally relate to that. And so then I've always been hungry to give back to my motherland, right?
Sure.
And then we were like, wow, maybe India's youth is also on the move. I mean, India is a country big time on the move, and maybe it can help. And that's when we started to reach out to publishers. We've got teams here that are stewarding us to do that. And it's a very interesting conversation we're having with publishers. So it's a large book, and they're like, "What's the max TAM, like total addressable market? And how can we price?" And we're like, "No, don't worry about the pricing. We want the message to go out there.
Yeah.
We've got so many people who could benefit from it." So they're interesting dialogues, and I think what we're leaning to as a team is we just figure out who will distribute it the widest at cost. We don't want anything but the message to be spread. We really care about mental health. We really care about the future of the youth. In fact, one of the big quotes for us is the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. And that it's hard to argue with that. And we really care about that. So that's our mission. And we're delighted that there's crossover potential. And I would actually welcome people to sample it and tell us if, in fact, what we've read early through the feedback we've gotten is, in fact, true.
Yeah, and it's very relatable. I mean, on camera also, I can say there are so many places where I felt that I was working with a certain number of clock burners to, I mean, referencing that you have given in the book to sometimes even sabotagers, you know, in the team itself. And, you know, you would be really scratching your head. Why aren't you achieving the satisfaction after coming back from 10 hours, 12 hours of working so hard? And, you know, now I get those answers thanks to you and thanks to the book. So, AJ, coming to your personal journey as a writer, how were your days while writing this book? Were there some challenging moments? Were there days when you felt that, oh, I don't want to do this? Or how was your experience writing?
It's a fair question. So as far as the fodder was concerned, the journals already had them. So that piece was actually surprisingly easy. Serendipitous, because I was not writing those journals with ever that intention that they would one day come together as a book. But as I was reading them and as I was compiling stuff, I did have my existential moments because I wanted to be fair. I did not want to write stories. I wanted it to be uber authentic. And so every now and again, I would write a story and I would imagine the person. So these are all human beings. And when they read them, they'll know that this is about them. So that's the piece.
That's true.
Now the question, and there's a disclosure at the end which says, listen, these are my perspectives. I have tried to paint them as truthfully as I perceive them, but Rashomon, the movie, says that a 6 that I write here, when I show it to you, is a 9 for you. So there are different perspectives to every situation. So having said that, my existential moments were when I really imagined sitting in the same space as the person, and they could say, come on. They could roll their eyes and say, come on. That's your interpretation. I would agree. But would they say, come on, that is not how it happened. That was what I didn't want to ever put anybody else or myself in a situation to. So that was my check. And all the rewrites are basically centered around 50 executives. That's a lot of executives. Being able to say, listen, that's your interpretation and I can own that, but I don't want them to feel like, oh, that didn't happen. So it was that authenticity filter made me rewrite quite a bit.
That's a lot of checks and balances and going back to your own journal. Oh my God. Were there any lessons while you were writing this and you were like, hey, I learned this while writing it. You have experienced these, you know, different stories that you're telling today to the world. But were there any lessons while writing it that you learned about yourself?
Yeah, I would fire myself so many times. I mean, at that point, I mean, as I read those journals, right, it's 30 years of progressive experience. So I was writing it as a 22, 23-year-old. I was writing as a 32, and I was writing it as a 42 all the way through, right? I was like, geez, that was one tough character. And so I think this is like 1/10 of what remained. 9/10 of it, I was like, I would fire this guy in a heartbeat. And I've actually given a plug to all my managers and to all my leaders saying, thank you for supporting me. Because again, this whole energy thing, now I know how to contain it. Now I know how to plug 90 hours. But when I was young and I had the same energy and I still didn't need more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep, I would be like, I don't know why.
It's interesting that you got that much 4 hours.
But I've never bought a car in my life. All the cars are my bosses, my boss being my wife's. And I don't have a car and I don't have any other interests. So it's a tick. It's a unique way of looking at the world. And I now accept it. Earlier, I used to give people a hard time. Now I'm like, it is the way it is.
Great, AJ. You've been doing amazing in this whole thing. Now I'm going to lighten it up a little bit more. And I'm going to ask you some quick rapid fire questions. And these you have to keep in mind are for the Gen Zs. And they are for the Zoomers. And they are for people who will just be entering the corporate world. So Should we start with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. First question is that Yapaholics is a guide for the millennials and the zoomers. And if you had to summarize the one biggest mistake a millennial should not do when they're entering the corporate world.
Not try and take on the biggest project to feel relevant, but perhaps take on something that is very bite-sized, but become an expert at it, and basically have the whole team depend on them for that.
Very interesting. Why such a hairy problem like AI for wellness when we have so many sexier problems to solve right now, like AI, taking us to the Mars? So why wellness?
Because I have not given up on humanity. I have not given up on our planet. My analogy is wellness is what is going to propel human progress. And if you're going to go to Mars, we're going to have people who are going to live to be 150 and who are going to need, 800 calories, and they're going to be able to, have brains that function under high stress. And that's all a platform of wellness. So that's kind of
that's very futuristic.
That's my stake.
That's very
my
futuristic. As an AI wellness entrepreneur, what is that one skill you think millennials and zoomers need to pick to thrive today at the workplace?
It's a very interesting question. So I think we touched a little bit upon it about take something very specific that's important to the company. It may not be big and broad, but it becomes their forte. The other thing I think is, and it didn't exist during our time, so there was no such thing as a personal brand. Everything was the company brand, and we kind of just put on the blinders and we kept, pushing the company magic. With this social media, now I think it's moved the other way to personal branding.
Yeah.
So I think, without being preachy, I think there's this balance between caring for the company and its mandate and giving authentically of oneself, but also preserving a personal brand. And I think somebody such as you is doing a really good job of that. So maintaining that balance between being in true partnership with the organization, versus just going off as an independent brand too early. I think that balance needs to still be struck.
Very interestingly said. Last question in this rapid fire is, what is that one advice you would like to give someone who has just started right now and is struggling to find a voice in a room filled with people who are already seasoned, corporate people out there, or like seniors? How can a young person who just joined find his own voice, his or her own voice in that room?
So there are multiple ways. One we already touched upon, which is find something that makes one distinctive. The other thing is networks, the power of networks. And I think Millennials and Zoomers do this particularly well, right? They create ecosystems. So start to make those communities, and that helps in multiple ways, right? One, it gives one a reality check of what else is happening in other teams, so that one knows where one is versus the universe. The other is also starts to remember the whole occupational wellness equation. One's skills and knowledge plus one's passion plus the organization's need is equal to occupational wellness. So it starts to give people a sense of what else the organization needs, and then one time they're like, I'm in this organization, I'm going to do the best. By organization, I mean team here. But that team is more interesting to me. So, a year or two later, I can start the dialogue and I can migrate. And then one doesn't have to quit an organization. And that's, I think, the way to do it, to have an ecosystem view where you're once getting into a bird's eye view of other parts of the organization.
And I think that system of transparency also helps people understand where all they can grow in that particular organization.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Is there a chapter here in this book which you think somebody who's just starting off their corporate life should read for sure? As an author, you would recommend?
Yeah, I love chapter 21. It's called Speed Life, and there are 50 anecdotes, right? So one can just read 1 and 5 minutes and reflect on it. But Speed Life is about what can happen at the age of 30 or 32 for somebody entering the workforce. When we entered the workforce at 30, 32, if we became a manager, we were lucky. If we had like 2 people to manage, you're like. But for these guys, they can go all the way. And so it's written like a palindrome, right? You can read from the beginning, you can read from the end. So chapter 21 is the second last chapter. And in that, we paint the picture of a young Zoomer or a young Millennial who's now the chief operating officer at the age of 30. And they're leading everybody who's many decades older than them. And how they get there is what all of those anecdotes are. So I think the big, almost like a mic drop moment is the knowledge and the skills will get you to the table, but reading the room will keep you there as a young man.
That's it. Thank you, thank you. Thank
Pleasure.
you, Abhijoy, for bringing this interesting book to India as well. And I'm really excited whenever the launch happens for the India to read this with my peers, with my colleagues, give them also the reference of it. And thank you for doing such an interesting job in the AI wellness space. We do need a lot of support.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for giving us the chance to spread our message. Occupational wellness, baby.
Yes, yes. We need this. We need this. Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
very much.